Hello and welcome to WooStream Bringing Willamette to You. My name is Tiffany Newton and I lead the Alumni and Parent Engagement team here at Willamette University. Today's conversation features Jonathan Mayes, CEO of Jonathan Mayes Consulting and former Senior Vice President, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Albertsons Companies, one of America's largest grocery and pharmacy chains. Albertsons Companies employs nearly 300,000 associates and operates nearly 2,300 stores under 20 different banners in 34 states and Washington, D.C. Mr. Mayes is a nationally known speaker on diversity, equity, and inclusion topics and has frequently presented at conferences, major universities, and corporations across the United States. He led his company's award-winning diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts and is a certified diversity executive. He's twice been named one of the top 100 diversity and inclusion executives in the U.S., in addition to other awards, too numerous to name here. Mr. Mayes received his Bachelor of Science degree from Warner Pacific College in Portland, Oregon, and a Juris Doctorate degree from Willamette University's College of Law. He's also a member of Phi Beta Kappa. Mr. Mayes began his legal career in the San Francisco Bay Area and later joined Safeway, Inc. in 1994, where he held a number of leadership positions, including Senior Vice President of Government Relations, Public Affairs, Sustainability, and Philanthropy. He continued in that role when Safeway merged with Albertsons Companies in 2015, before being named to his most recent role in 2017. Mr. Mayes is a former professional musician, singer, arranger, and band leader. He plays piano, guitar, bass, violin, and percussion instruments. He is also an accomplished endurance athlete, having completed Ironman triathlons, ultra marathons, and over 90 marathons. Today's conversation will be around why diversity and equity inclusion matter and what we can do about it. We'll talk about all of this, but please join me in welcoming Jonathan Mayes.
Tiffany, thank you very much. My goal, everyone, is to be helpful to you during this time. And I want to begin by telling you a true story about my time at Willamette that I'll never forget. When I was attending law school at Willamette, my wife and I decided that we were going to be living in California when I graduated from law school in the San Francisco area. So before my third year of law school, I was fortunate to get a clerkship at a law firm in Oakland. And I'll never forget looking for a place to live for that summer for that clerkship. And I was put into contact with a person who had a room and she was willing to rent it to me. We had a couple of conversations and over the phone. And she said, Jonathan, I'll never forget the last conversation. She said, Jonathan, I really look forward to meeting you. I really look forward to your staying with me this summer. And I said, thank you. I look forward to staying with you as well. And I'll never forget the day I drove from Salem to Oakland. And I pulled my car into her driveway, walked up the steps to her house, rang the doorbell. The door opened, and I looked off to the side, and I saw the woman of the house there. And I've never in my life seen a person's smile turn upside down into a frown faster than that day. I mean, I could almost feel a chill from that direction coming my way. Well, long story made a little bit short, I was shown my room, woke up the next morning, came upstairs into the living room, and the woman of the house was sitting on the sofa. And I said, good morning. And she looked at me through steely eyes and gritted teeth. She said, it is not a good morning. And I said, well, what's wrong? Is everything okay? And she pointed at me and she said, you should have told me. And I said, told you what? That you're Black, she said. And I responded, I didn't know that it mattered. Does it matter? Why, yes, it matters, she said. And I said, why? And she said, my neighbors are going to think you're a burglar. So you can't stay here. So at this point, I was scared. I needed a place to live. I didn't have first and last month's rent to look for and then find some apartment to live in on literally my first day at work at the firm. I didn't know what to do. And so in my mind, I thought, Jonathan, show her love. Be kind. Be as nice as you can be. Let her know through your actions you're a good guy. And maybe she'll see that and then she'll let you stay. And so when she said, Jonathan, my neighbors are going to think you're a burglar, I said, well, ma'am, when I leave your house in the morning, I'm going to be dressed like I was that day. I'm going to be in a suit. I'm going to have a tie on. I'm going to have a briefcase. And so I said, when I come home during the week, I'm going to be dressed the same way. And so I don't think they're going to think I'm a burglar. But I'll tell you what, when I get home from work today, I'd be more than glad to introduce myself to your neighbors, to let them know I'm a law school student here for the summer, attending Willamette University, and I'm just working but living here during the summer. Is that okay? She said, no, you can't stay here. I'm really afraid. I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I don't have a place to live. I can't. What am I going to do? And so I said, ma'am, you promised me. We had an agreement that I would stay here this summer. She said, you can't stay. You got to go. And so I said, well, may I stay at least one more night? She said, one night and you're out of here. You can imagine the fog I was in driving from her house to the law firm that day. I mean, to this day, I'm grateful I got there safely because I'm trying to figure out what am I. And it's supposed to be a glorious day because it's my first day at the law firm where I was hoping to work and where I ended up working. I'll never forget going to lunch with some of the partners. They took me to the fanciest restaurant I'd ever been to welcome this new summer clerk at the firm. And we sat across the table. I said, so, Jonathan, how's it going? And I told them what happened. And one of the partners looked me in the eye and he said, Jonathan, do you want to sue her? And I smiled and I said to myself, this is exactly where I want to work. But really, I needed a place to live. Well, I told this story to a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine. And as I was telling her the story, I couldn't help but noticing the tears in her eyes. And I thought she felt badly because of the way I'd been treated. And she did. But she said something that I never thought about. She said, Jonathan, I've known you for years. You're a really good guy. That woman never gave you a chance to show that you're a good guy. You probably would have ended up being friends, good friends, but she never gave you a chance. And I tell you this story because in the workaday world, all too often, people make judgments about other people just on the basis of a preconceived notion about them. Maybe it's because of their race. Maybe it's because of a judgment based on how people feel about a gender or whatever it might be. And it happens really fast, these decisions that people make in their minds. At a subconscious level, they're not even aware sometimes that they are. And that's because neuroscientists will tell us that the human mind, your mind, my mind, can take in 11 million pieces of information every split second. But really, at a conscious level, you are only aware of 40. And I tell you that because you're making judgments based on all this data coming into your mind, and you're making conclusions, reaching conclusions, but you're not even always sure why, because it's happening at the subconscious level. You're aware of some of those things, the roughly 40 pieces, but not all of them. And where that results in how we view people is that mentally, we will give them a thumbs up, I like that person, or a thumbs down. And it happens again in milliseconds, really fast sometimes. But it impacts how we sometimes feel, about other people. And experts in the work that I do will tell you there are, some will say, more than 100 types of bias. And this is what it leads to. It's unconscious, subconscious, but it's a bias that occurs. There are more than 100. Others will say there are more than 40. Here are 8 that are just really, really common. And I just want to take a moment and kind of talk through them so you can more readily recognize them. And again, these are 8 of dozens of them. The first is what's called in-group bias. And as the name suggests, it's a tendency to give preferential treatment to people who are like us, people who are members of our own, if you will, group. There's a story I read just a few years ago, but it's an example of this. Long story made short, it's about the NFL and something called the Rooney Rule. And it was a commitment by NFL owners that they were going to interview at least one person of color as a finalist before they made a head coaching decision. And this has been in the news just in the last less than 6 months, as some of you may know. But they were going to make the decision, but they were going to do it fairly because they're going to do it based on getting different people from different groups, ethnic groups, as part of the final interview panel. Well, there was a guy who was a finalist, didn't get the job, and he went to the team owner and he said, "Tell me, why is it that Joe got the role as head coach and I didn't? Because I've looked at Joe's record and I've been involved as an assistant coach in teams with better winning records. I've been doing this longer than he has. I have more experience. So I have a better record. I have more experience, but he got the job and I didn't. Why?" And in an extraordinary display of candor, the owner looked at him and said, "Well, I guess I just felt more comfortable around Joe than I did around you." And that's honest, but that's part of the in-group bias that happens all the time, happens a lot. Confirmation bias, and if you're really honest, you can probably admit that there's a little bit of this maybe in going on in you, because it certainly goes on with me, and I'm working on this. All of these things I'm working on. Confirmation bias is where you search for, you're interpreting, you're emphasizing, you're recalling information in a way that confirms one's preconceived notions. It's a lot of words, but here's an example of that. I mean, think for a moment if you watch cable news, and I suppose many of you do, and I have friends, and they will only watch Fox for their news. I mean, it's Fox or nothing, right? I have other friends who will watch MSNBC. They wouldn't imagine ever watching Fox News. And I have other people who watch CNN. They wouldn't imagine watching anything else. Well, why is that? Well, because they're looking for facts that support something they already kind of believe. They're looking for information that confirms what they already think. And it's a bias that's always seeking to confirm what we already think. And that manifests itself in the way we make decisions sometimes about who we're going to hire and who we're going to promote if we are in that position to make those decisions, where the last 3 people we hired for that role looked like this. I'm going to hire another person who looks like that because I believe people who look like that will be better. It's just and so these are decisions that you make. Halo horn effect is allowing a person's positive or negative traits to spill over from one personality area to another in one's perception of it. And you've seen this. I mean, maybe you've experienced this, where if someone says, "I went to this college, you went to that college too, therefore you think they've got to be good." And so you give them kind of preferential treatment in terms of who you are going to hire for that role or who you're going to promote, because there's a halo over their head because of some characteristic that you think is laudable. Well, when I think about halo horn, the person who comes to my mind is this guy, Bill Cosby. And if you're like me, you grew up watching him on the Cosby Show, and you grew up being a fan of his. And so when stories started circulating about how he was assaulting women, drugging and assaulting women, people were saying, "Oh, that can't be," because there's this halo over him, right? Not the lovable, Heathcliff Huxtable, Dr. Huxtable from the Cosby Show. No. But when it was 5 women and 10 women, even some people were saying, oh, no, they're just all making it up. And then 15 and then 20 and then 25. Pretty soon people said, oh, what we thought about him, this halo, wasn't justified. And again, we all too often will do that as well. We will attach a halo over someone that's not earned, but also a horn over someone that's not earned. I think about my Muslim brothers and sisters and what has happened to them over the last several years. Just kind of this preconceived notion that some people have just based on the fact that they happen to be in a group, a horn over their head, making it harder for them to find jobs or to get promoted, et cetera, et cetera. Halo horn, it's real. Stereotyping is something that we all likely are very familiar with. And again, you just make conclusions about groups and you believe them to be true, even when they are not necessarily true. I was the victim of stereotyping in that story. 5 is availability bias. I mean, that's a situation where if you're making decisions about who you're going to hire, who you're going to promote, there's this notion of, man, I know that only 3% of our senior management happens to be women, but we just can't find any. Really? I mean, really? There. And they're available to be hired and promoted in these roles. But I've heard, and perhaps you have as well, this whole notion of, well, we just can't find any, so we're going to hire another guy. And I've got nothing against guys, just to be clear. But, and I'll talk more about this in a moment, but there's a clear business case for diversity in the workplace, for women, for people of color. And we're lessening the likelihood of leveraging different perspectives, different ideas, when we are limiting the hiring and promotion of people in groups that are underrepresented. And I'll talk more about this in just a moment. Recency effect. It's ignoring outcomes at the beginning or the middle of a sequence, and instead you focus on the most recent memory. It's a lot of words, but what are we talking about here? Well, I think about the accident involving Kobe Bryant, the helicopter crash, as an example of this. I have a friend who's a commercial helicopter pilot. Helicopters have been flying and landing safely for decades. But when the accident happened, he was getting cancellations right and left. Why? Because people are looking at just what happened recently and thinking, that's all about helicopters, what happened recently, as opposed to looking at the history of safe flights involving helicopters. And same thing here in terms of how we sometimes view people at work. Maybe for years they were an amazing, stellar performer, but lately things have kind of tailed off a little bit. And so we kind of can forget all the good things that they had done in the years past, the contributions they made, the input they provided in meetings that was helpful. Instead, we just kind of focus on the last week or two where their performance maybe isn't what it was a month ago or 2 months ago. And the problem with that is that we don't take into account, maybe there's something going on. Maybe there's a partner that's ill, or a kid who's chronically ill, or something else that's going on in their life that's just not allowing them to be their best right now, but it's temporary. And so my recommendation is to urge you to kind of find out what's going on, but to look at the big picture, not to focus just on what happened most recently. And again, that's what we tend to do. Loss aversion is this tendency to prefer avoiding losses by maintaining the status quo. It's to do what you've been doing because you've been doing it in the past. And maybe that's the best way to do it, but it's not necessarily so. Because we all aspire for positive change. We all aspire to that. Sometimes that involves taking a little bit of a risk, a little bit of a chance. But by doing so, by taking a chance, it can enhance the ability to do what you do better and bring about the positive change. And so, again, this whole notion of being overly risk adverse, certainly there are benefits to that, but there's a downside as well. And we need to look at the bias towards risk aversion because it can limit our ability to do and be our best. And then number 8 is this whole notion of the bandwagon effect. It's this tendency to do or believe things because many other people do, often due to a desire for harmony or conformity in a group. I'm sure if I did a show of hands, almost all of you, if not all of you, will agree. You've been in conversations with people. You've been in meetings, perhaps, with people where people are saying, let's do this. I mean, a decision is made. Let's do this. And you're sitting in this meeting and you're thinking, I don't think that's the best approach. But it's so easy not to say anything because you just kind of go with the flow. And sometimes that's best, but many times it's not. And so, you're in these meetings where the leader will say, I think we should do X. And in your mind, as I was saying, you're thinking, say it ain't so. Another person, you've got to be kidding me. Another person, perish the thought that we would ever do that. No, 1,000 times no, heaven forbid. I mean, these things are going through the minds of the people who sit in the meeting. And then, okay, let's go for a vote. You've been in meetings like that. I know that many of you have, if not all of you. And I just want to urge you, and I say this to myself as well, if you really firmly believe that there's a different approach worth considering it, resist the bias to go with the flow and kind of step back and just say, would you guys be open to a different perspective? Would you mind if I kind of take the devil's advocate position for just a moment? Would you be open to that? And most people will say yes, and then give your idea. I'm not talking about being a negative kind of obstructionist, always contrarian type. I'm not talking about that. But you know what it's like, where you kind of go with the flow when you feel it should be done a different way. You just hold your tongue. And I just want to encourage myself and you to just exercise that additional level of willingness to just raise your hand and just to say, what about a different approach? So these are 8 of more than 40, some would say more than 100 types of bias. I'm confident that most, if not all of you, have seen this in action. And I'm working on identifying these in my own life and to try to eradicate them. And I want to urge you to consider doing the same for the reasons that I have mentioned. Why? Well, in the business setting, it's because I believe your organization wants to be the very best it can possibly be. Whether you're in corporate America, whether you are a nonprofit, whatever it might be, I believe about you that you want to be your best. And I believe about you that you want your organization to be its best. And research shows time and time again that organizations that really sincerely, genuinely lean into diversity, equity, and inclusion typically outperform companies that don't. I mean, just an example, you see McKinsey and Company listed here. They've done a number of research studies. The most recent one from a couple of years ago surveyed more than 1,000 companies. And what they found was by dividing all those companies, they took more than 1,000 and you kind of put them in the top groups in terms of the highest percentage of women in leadership at those organizations. And so the top organizations in terms of percent of women in leadership, they found that they were 25% more likely to outperform companies at the other end of the spectrum, where there were very little women leadership at the top. That's what they found. And it wasn't just like 5 companies or 10 companies. This was across 1,000 companies, 25% more likely to outperform those at the other end of the spectrum. For people of color, again, companies that did the best in terms of highest percentage of people of color in the senior most ranks, okay, those groups, they found that they were 36% more likely to outperform organizations at the other end of the spectrum. So some companies will say, I don't buy this diversity stuff. It's all overrated. Well, okay, you can do that. But they found that you are at least 29% or more likely to underperform industry peers if that's the position you take. Why? I mean, what's the basis for these stats? Where do they come from? Well, the research shows, based on the organizations I showed on the screen and other studies, that top diverse and inclusive companies produce higher financial returns. They perform tasks with higher collective intelligence. Again, because you have different perspectives that are in the room that might not otherwise be there. It can lessen the chance of PR controversies. Decisions that companies make And you've seen them, I've seen them, PR blunders that companies make. And it's because, frankly, they don't have the right voices in the room. Or there's a voice that's not in the room that should be in the room that could say, I don't think you want to do that because you don't mean to upset a group of people, but by doing this, you will. The company H&M experienced that a few years ago with the little kid, the black kid, who had the hoodie on that said, coolest monkey in the jungle. What? I mean, I'm guessing that there was not a person of color in that marketing decision meeting to say, I don't think that's a good idea. Or a person with some sensitivity about race issues to say, I don't think it's a good idea. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, where the bandwagon effect, where people are saying, yeah, let's do that. If someone had the courage to say, I don't think that's a good idea, then maybe it would have been heated. You can lessen the likelihood of PR controversies when you get different voices in the room. Higher levels of innovation have been shown by having diverse and inclusive teams. And then you're better able to attract and retain diverse talent when you have diverse talent to begin with. These are just some of the many business reasons for why diversity, equity, inclusion matter and why we should embrace it. And when I talk about diversity, I want to be clear. I'm talking about it at all levels. I'm talking about people with disabilities. I'm talking about all ethnic groups. I'm talking about all ages, because there's ageism as well. And it works in two directions, not only discrimination or bias against older people, but it's bias against younger people, to be clear. I'm talking about LGBTQ plus trans folks as well. I'm talking about everything. Let's do our best to eliminate bias against these groups. People who are just showing up in their own skin, but who have things to offer. We just need to give them a chance. So here's what I want to do. I mentioned earlier that I believe about you that you want to be the very best version of yourself. And I've done lots of reading about the best ways to identify bias. And I talked about 8 types of bias a little while ago, of course, but to identify bias and then hopefully to stomp it out, to eradicate it, to mitigate it in your own life. And so I want to think about this word self, and let's make it an acronym. Self. What does S stand for? S stands for slow down. If you're in a decision-making role and you have the power to decide who gets hired or who gets promoted, who gets mentored, who gets additional resources to help him or her advance, I want to ask you, and I want to ask myself as well, because I'm working on this too, to just slow down and ask yourself, is it possible that I'm picking this person instead of that person because of bias going on? If that NFL owner had done that, I don't know if he would have decided differently, but I don't think he slowed down. I think he went with just what he thought. If that woman who was supposed to have been my landlord had slowed down, I don't know if it would have mattered, but it might have helped. Slow down and ask, what's going on here? Why am I going with this direction instead of that direction? Is it possible that bias somehow has crept in here that's causing me to think this way? And if the answer is yes, stop and just say, hold on, there are business reasons for why we should go in a different direction than what I might be inclined to do. Slow down. E in self is all about empathy. Empathy. Putting yourself as best you can in the shoes of other people with whom you interact. How would you like to be treated if you were in their shoes? Just pause. Imagine yourself in their shoes. How would you like to be treated? And then do your utmost to treat them that way. Take a person, and again, in the work environment, who's applying for a job, they want to be treated fairly. They want to be given a fair shake. They want to be given an opportunity to be selected for the role. Put yourself in their shoes as the interviewer or the decision maker, or someone who maybe is in your organization, who maybe yearns for additional development opportunities so he or she can move up in the organization. Put yourself in their shoes. How would you like to be treated? And then do your utmost to treat them that way. Empathy is all about walking in other people's shoes. Again, if that woman landlord, would-be landlord of mine, had done this, would it have helped? Possibly. Possibly. E is all about empathy. L is about learning. And by learning, I'm talking about never stop. I'm talking about yearning to learn. I'm talking about leaning in and listening to folks who maybe have a perspective that's different from yours. I'm talking about learning about different cultures and why they do what they do and how they do what they do and why it might be different from you, but it might be actually a different approach that you should consider. But just to be curious about others and about other cultures, because by doing so, it can lessen the likelihood that you might be biased against that group because you're learning more about them. And you're learning that people in a group that you might frankly be a little distant towards, the people in that group can actually be really cool people. You just need to give them a chance to show that. And then F in self stands for the word find. Find. Jonathan, what do you mean by find? What I mean is find people in groups that if you're really, really honest, there's a little bit of distance towards. You're not that likely, if you're in a party or reception, to walk up to them. Find people in groups that, if you're honest, there's a little bit of maybe bias towards. And find people in that group who are exemplary people. They're there. They're there. Absolutely. But all too often, if we have a negative proclivity towards a particular group, it's because we focus on the folks in that group who are negative. Because you, I think, know, and I certainly do, that for every single group, pick one. There are people who are amazing people. And people, not so much, for every group. And if there's bias towards a group, it's often because we're focused on the not so great people in that group, and we paint that whole group by that same brush. Find people who, if you're, again, a little distant towards, who are exemplary, they exist, and get to know them because it can positively impact how you feel overall about that group. This self acronym is something I use. I use it a lot to identify and mitigate bias that I might feel. And I want to encourage you to use this tool as well. It's as you think about how you interact with people and why it is you may have a view about someone that might be, frankly, not so positive. So as I close, and we'll go to Q&A, and I'll turn it over to Tiffany in just a couple of moments, there's a self-help guru that some of you have heard of probably. His name is Anthony Robbins. He's of some renown, Anthony Robbins. And he said a lot of really, really good things. And here's one. So when we talk about bias, right, we talk about just treating people like we ourselves would like to be treated. And we talk about discrimination and racism and all that sort of thing, and ageism and of all kinds. What he said is things will get better in terms of all those things and attacking them to make them less prevalent in our culture. Things will get better when we get better, when we get better. But this can be a cop-out, right? Because sure, it's a nice saying. And so, when Tiffany gets better, when Abby gets better, when Steve gets better, when Pamela gets better, then everything will be better. It's a cop-out because there are other people. But no. Well, a person took it a step further. It's not the Queen's English, but he said, sure, things will get better when we get better, but we will get better when me gets better. And so my challenge to me, my challenge to you is the person you see in the mirror, ask yourself, what can I do to be better and to influence others to do the same? Sure, things will get better when we get better, but we will get better when me, the person in the mirror. And that's my challenge to myself and to you as well, to ask yourself what more you can do. We can put our hands together individually and collectively to have a place where things really are better for all of us. And so with that, Tiffany, I want to invite any questions or comments that people may have.
Well, first, I just want to say thank you for summarizing what could be a semester or year-long, topic into some really clear-cut, actionable things that folks can do themselves. My background is in social work, and I did that in Los Angeles and Baltimore. And the parallels are very obvious. It's cultivating self-awareness, humility, being open to learning, recognizing strength and resilience in other people and the values that has, and that empathy. And so I just really appreciate that. And what we would say is do better when you know better and continue to learn and so that you know more and can be a better, safer, more supportive, approachable person for the people around you.
Exactly.
With that, we do have a couple of questions. I'll start with the first one from Patricia. Can you speak to what organizations should do to get ready to invite staff of color, BIPOC staff, to feel like they can belong in what is a predominantly white culture?
So first of all, thanks for the question. There are a couple of things for sure that you can start with. The first, in no particular order, is consider, and I don't know what kind of organization this is, but many corporations have different employee engagement groups. Say employee resource groups is what they typically are called, ERGs. And so if your organization does not already have that sort of thing, I want to recommend that your organization launch one. Typically in organizations, the largest group will be, in terms of kind of who are underrepresented in leadership, happen to be women in many organizations. And so the first kind of natural group to start is a women's employee resource group. And then you can group it, if you don't have very many, you just can call it a BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color group as well. And so it's an ERG, an employee resource group for that group. And so those folks can come together, they can share common experiences, common stories, they can support each other, they can help the HR team in its recruitment efforts to attract more individuals. So those are a couple of things you can do. Here are a few more things you can do. So an organization can have a meeting with people of color who are in leadership. I'll give an example. At Albertsons Companies, in the wake of the George Floyd murder, and Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, and others, I went to my company's CEO and I said, I'm going to recommend something. I want you to consider it. Black people are hurting. They're hurting in our organization. And we need to do a number of things about it. And he readily agreed. And so there was a statement of support and condemnation for what happened in those instances. But in addition to that, we had 2 sessions with the CEO of our company and a group of nearly 100 Black associates. And others could join, but for the most part, Black associates. And here are the questions we asked. The CEO asked, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Second thing was, how can we help you? How can we support you during this time? And so to the question, I think, and that's just one of many types of things we've done, consider having a leader meet with that group. Maybe it's just all BIPOC folks, or maybe it's Hispanic or Asian. And think about the AAPI hate that was going on and the assaults that were going on. Meet with that group. Same thing. We did the same thing. How are you doing? How can we support you? And here's what we are already doing to help. And so that conversation shows you care. And so it builds a culture where there's a belief by folks of color or women or LGBTQ, whatever the group might be, that the company cares about them and wants to know how they can help. And it's not just talk, it's action. And so I could go on, but those are some of the things you can do to be really more aware of how you can support folks who are BIPOC or women, LGBTQ+, whatever the group may be.
And I would add from the Willamette side of things, part of it is also training your whole culture to be mindful and set that as an expectation. I know we had some of our first student assistants that were identified as non-binary. So we did training on gender affirming and inclusive language and had that at staff meetings so that it wouldn't be on that student assistant to train the people that they were working with, but instead the whole community was showing up and working so that we could be more supportive and knowledgeable about that. And that's another way to do that. So thank you.
Yes,
so
sure.
The next question we have, what steps can an organization take to identify shortcomings in its DEI initiative? So they're trying, they're doing things, but maybe they're falling short, or are there ways to affect that?
So what I would do is I would just step back and look at the big picture, because the term shortcomings was mentioned there. But how do you measure? How do you know if it's a shortcoming or not? So you need to step back and just ask, who are we trying to be in terms of our company and our culture? Do we want a welcoming culture where everyone can feel welcomed, that they have a sense of belonging? Do we want a culture where there's diversity in terms of women and people of color in leadership? And so just frame, if you will, a mission statement or an aspiration. Start there. Who do you want to be? What do you want to be? Second step is, now that you know what the aspiration is, who you want to be. Okay. Next step is, come up with a strategy for steps that you can take to get there. Steps you can take to get there. And so that might be things such as workshops to help raise awareness of bias, much like the one today. It can be a number of different things as well, but identify steps that you are willing to take in order to reach your goal. Part of that involves, frankly, metrics. It's looking at what your numbers look like for women and people of color in management. Again, if your goal is to represent the communities that you serve in terms of ethnicity, in terms of gender, at all levels of the organization, you have to measure it. And so the word shortcomings, again, was used. Where are you falling short, right, in that? Next step is, how do people feel about working here? So this whole notion of inclusion and belonging and feelings of equity and all those sorts of things. So you can do engagement surveys to find out how people feel. Just ask them, when you are in a meeting, do you feel heard? Are you getting the resources that you need in order to do your job well? Ask questions to kind of better understand. And then the next step, and the most important step after you've done all those, is to make a commitment to be better next month than you are today, to be better a year from now than you are today. Let's take metrics, for example. If you look at your metrics for people in leadership in your organization, maybe it's VP and above, or however you define leadership, particularly if you're a larger organization. Last I checked, women make up roughly 50% of the population. Look at the numbers you have for people at VP and above. And if you are at 5%, there's an opportunity obviously there. And so you measure and you think, okay, I'm at 5% now. A year from now, I want to be higher. And 2 years from now, I want to be higher still. That sort of thing. Those are some of the things that you can do to move the needle to have impact.
Thank you for that. One person was asking, because some of your examples, and of course, a lot of your experiences working with large organizations, and they're thinking of, their own situation, maybe 300 employees or so, where there are a handful of folks who identify as BIPOC or LGBT or something, and what suggestions you might have in that environment or with that size.
I would go to those people. I would consider, first of all, the leader of that organization, and I have clients that are, smaller, right, than 300,000 folks, like, where I worked until recently. And so what I'm recommending they do is to make sure their leadership understands the business case. I call it the business case for this, why it matters, why diversity matters. Make sure he or she understands that. One. Step two, communicate. Have the leader communicate. This is important to us. There's some opportunities here to better reflect the communities we serve in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of other factors, other elements as well. But have him or her, the leader, say, we're gonna be a better, more welcoming environment where everyone feels that they can belong. Right? So it begins there. And then the next step, and I alluded to this earlier, is consider, and this is bold, but I've helped people do this, where different departments might be highly underrepresented for women and people of color. IT is an example of that for many organizations, where maybe you have a high percentage of folks from India, as an example, but Hispanic, Black and brown folks, not so much. So maybe you meet with the Black and brown folks in the organization and you say, what can we do? How are things going for you? What can we do to find more? Do you know folks? But just how can we let you know that you're welcomed, that we value you here, we want you to stay? What can we do to be of more support? And so, large or small, those are some steps you can take to let folks, A, know that they're valued, not only by what you say, but how you treat them, but also that you want their input as to how they can do what they do better.
Thank you. Another person, Nicole, is wanted to share that how wonderful this discussion is and how appreciative they are of your time and expertise. As leaders, with your work in the diversity space, what from your work in this diversity space creates the greatest outcomes to really shift to a more inclusive organization? What do you see as the most common pitfalls to be aware of as you're working to make these shifts?
Yeah, so let's talk about pitfalls first. So, as you mentioned, Tiffany, I'm a marathon runner, right? And I enjoy doing this. I'm doing a marathon on Sunday, as a matter of fact. I really love this. But here's what after running more than 90 marathons, here's what I've learned. A lot of things, but here's one thing I've learned that directly relates to diversity, equity, inclusion. A lot of organizations will start out. I mean, they know about George Floyd. A lot of companies said, we're serious. We're going to do something about it. And they start out running fast. And by mile 15, they start slowing down. Or to put it in different ways, after a month or two, it starts to fizzle out. It starts to slow down. So the pitfall, I would say, is think of this not as a sprint, but as a marathon. And to be intentional about saying 6 months from now, this is where I want to be. A year from now, this is where I want to be. 2 years, this is where I want to be. And to keep, if you will, continuing the running metaphor, pumping your arms, moving your lifting your knees and running towards that. A pitfall is that people peter out. It's a sprint, and it's not a sprint. This work is a marathon. Another pitfall is that leadership will say, oh yeah, boy, George Floyd, terrible. We're going to really do a good job of embracing all folks. Okay, and then crickets after that. You don't hear anything. So what can you do? So what you can do is you can pulse out messages. Maybe it's once a quarter, maybe it's twice a year. It's going to depend on your culture as a company, how often you typically have done that. It talks about, this is Pride Month. This is what it means. This is Women's History Month. This is what it means. This is Black History Month. This is what it means. This is Asian. This is Chinese New Year. This is and just to celebrate those. Hanukkah. This is what this means, et cetera, et cetera. But just to pulse messages out to let folks who are in those groups know, and then to get their opinion, people in those groups, about how they can how best the organization can celebrate Women's History Month or Black History Month or other various celebrations that occur during the year, to get their involvement. And so what are the best practices? To ask your people their opinions and then to act on those ideas whenever you can. I'll just give one really quick example of this, because all of what I'm saying, it's real. I know it from experience. I'm going to just change the name because to protect the innocent, if you will. But in one of our large divisions, there was a licensee that provided Chinese food products. And so in the stores, they had this area in the store, and they sold products for takeout. And they had a name for their company that was offensive to some people in the Asian community. I didn't know it was offensive, but they told us it was. And so we then said to the organization, we know it's not intentional, but this name for some is offensive. And again, we know this is not intentional. We'd like you to consider changing the name. And so a friend of mine who I told the story to took a picture when he was in one of the Safeway stores and said, hey, the new name that you told me about, it's here. I say that all to say, if you're going to say you're going to be interested in welcoming everybody and listening to other people's perspectives, a best practice is to do that. And so we got a lot of praise from the group saying, thank you so much for doing that. And also let other groups know, we're hearing you, we listen, we welcome you, we want to know what you think. And when possible, we will act on what you think in ways that will be pleasing to you.
So our next question is from someone who is saying, you reference leadership multiple times. Could you go into who is the leadership? Who needs to own and be accountable within an organization for DEI strategy and execution? Too often this gets relegated to an HR function, and that may not cause the systemic change that we're looking for.
Yeah. So when I talk about leadership, so at Albertsons companies, as an example, and other companies that are large will have a similar model, maybe not the same scale, but a similar model. And that is organizations will have obviously the head, the CEO, president, that sort of thing, but they'll have the C-suite, right? The C-level folks. Others will have, in addition to that, they'll have a senior leadership team, an SLT, that sort of thing. So when I talk about senior leadership, I'm talking about, if you will, the SLT, the senior leadership team, or whatever your organization may call it, but the leaders. And Tiffany, to your point, and to the question about HR, this is everybody's business. It's not just HR's. It's everybody's business. There's a great book many of you have heard of called Good to Great. And one of the concepts behind that book is the leader of that organization casts a vision, and they're saying, this is the bus. This is our destination. We're going in that destination. We want to have the right people in the right seats on that bus. And if for some reason you're not thinking that's the goal you want to be, okay, there's the exit to get the right people on the bus. The leader needs to have that kind of clear focus to say, this is who we are. We're not going to tolerate sexual harassment. We're not going to tolerate discrimination. We're not going to tolerate bias that's pervasive in our organization. This is who we are. And so it starts with the leadership that kind of just cascades out through all levels of the organization.
I appreciate that. Another question, and this is kind of getting more into the weeds, when facilitating meetings, how can leadership help foster a more inclusive environment? For example, how to help individuals feel more comfortable sharing their personal pronouns in a professional meeting, or when they're having to disclose maybe a personal experience and don't feel fully safe doing so.
So one of the things that I did at my former employer was to create something called Leading with Inclusion. And these are 2-hour, highly interactive, facilitated, raw sometimes conversations. And I personally have led more than 50 of them, and I've trained dozens of people to lead them. We've done more than 10,000 people have gone through them. But I mentioned that to say it takes some level of training to be an effective facilitator. I'll never forget a story that another chief diversity officer told me after the George Floyd murder, where she said to me, yeah, Jonathan, after the George Floyd murder, we had a town hall meeting. We had a facilitator, and I'll never forget what she said. She said, the person facilitating that meeting had no business facilitating that meeting. And so it is a skill. But the idea behind being an effective facilitator is to say, this is a place where we welcome your perspectives. We want to know what you think. We want you to feel that you can come onto the field, if you will, and play. We don't want people to just be spectators. We want you to come onto the field. And we want to respect other views, even if they happen to be different from our own. These are sorts of things that can create an environment where people are more willing to share. I've been on calls where people came out for the first time publicly in their professional career because they felt it was a safe space for them to do that. I've been in calls where people said, I grew up in South Africa under apartheid. And so I was raised as a child to believe a certain way. And I'm determined to be different. But again, it does take a level of care and sensitivity to facilitate those discussions. And not everyone necessarily has those skills. And so if you're wanting to do that, you just need to be intentional about how you train people, if you will, to facilitate these carefully. And that's why I was really intentional about training people to facilitate these, as opposed to just giving them a script and saying, go for it.
And there are, coming again from the social work field, there are trainings to help people facilitate difficult conversations, and more importantly, to establish ground rules and what is going to be acceptable in that space and how you're going to hold that space in such a way to make it so that it will meet the goals as they're intended.
Yes.
And I know we're right at time, but we have one final question I think is really timely. COVID, of course, disproportionately impacted women and BIPOC individuals. Can you comment on the impact of COVID on DEI progress and what this means for the leadership ranks in the decades ahead?
So one thing, and we talk about women in the workplace, that a lot of folks used to think who were in leadership, not all, but a lot, was if you're not working in the office, you're not working, right? So this whole notion about telecommuting has been blown apart in most people's minds. Now, I know some people are beginning to come back, but are they going to come back 5 days a week like they have in the past? And so how has it impacted COVID? I think it's opened the eyes of a lot of leadership that you really can, and there are exceptions to almost everything, work productively from home. And particularly because of child raising, typically more often than not falls on women. For many, it's been very free. For many women, from what I've been told, it's been really freeing to give them the flexibility to be both a good mom, if you will, a good parent, but also to work productively, maybe not in the same hours they work. And so COVID, I think, has, I don't know if it can say irrevocably, but I think dramatically changed how people feel. In terms of people of color and COVID, I think about how it disproportionately impacted people of color in terms of illness, in terms of death. And so, again, it just kind of raised awareness that there still are disparities, in our culture that need to be addressed. But I know we're at the top of the hour, but the bottom line I would say is it is what it is in terms of the reality after COVID. And companies that are the best are the companies that say, this is a new frontier, it's a new paradigm. How can we welcome folks, but in ways that we've done differently in the past, to work remotely so that they can both live a life where they have other responsibilities outside the office, but able to also contribute a lot to the work at our company.
Thank you so much for that. I know we've stolen a couple of extra minutes, and someone did have a question on resources and reading. So we might email you to see if you have a couple of suggestions we can share with everyone else along with your materials. But with that, is there anything else you want to say before I close us out for the day?
I hope this has been helpful. I thank you for taking the time to join us today. And I want to thank Willamette for allowing this opportunity for this discussion to occur today.
Oh, Jonathan, we were so thankful for your time and expertise. You always come when we ask, and we couldn't be more grateful to have you as one of our wonderful alums, from your support of our students to commencement to everything else, including this career talk. For those of you who are online, we thank you for your time and your interest in this topic. It will be recorded and posted online later. With that, we hope you will continue to check out our WooStream programming, and we hope you all stay safe and healthy, and we will see you online sometime soon. Take care, everyone.